Good evening, I'm Cathy Lewis, and here's what matters. We are 45 days till election '08, and can you ever remember an election that's had more people talking? We'll try to get a word in edgewise tonight with Kimball Payne from the Daily Press. Don Luzzato is with us tonight, an editorial writer for the Virginian Pilot. Vivian Paige is a blogger from the Democratic side of things, and Brian Kirwin, a blogger from the Republican side of things. Welcome back, and thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. What is with the quiet here? Right before the cameras rolled, these people were, it was combustible energy. Now they're like, thank you. I mean, what a campaign this has been. I don't know about you. Honestly, do this little call-in radio show every day. People are so energized by this thing, for good or ill. It's been really amazing how energized and active people are and how much they want to talk about it. Are you seeing that in your reporting?
Well, just especially considering the length. I mean, we've been talking about the presidential election since 2006. Yeah, 2 years. Yeah. So it's unbelievable. But I guess sort of that. With the deadline approaching, you kind of get a little bit more jazzed up as it comes down the stretch.
And game changers since we last talked, not game changers, but the things that have changed for us since last we talked, is that we have 2 vice presidential candidates now. Last time we talked, we were talking about Eric Cantor. Brian, you're exactly right. We were talking about Eric Cantor. We were talking about Tim Kaine. Now, of course, we know who the vice presidential nominees are going to be, and that has really shaken things up.
It has. It has. The Democrats chose Joe Biden, whose best presidential performance was eking out 1% in Iowa. So I'm not sure what he brought to the ticket. Maybe he'll bring Delaware home for Obama. But Sarah Palin, Barracuda, has shook up the race. I have never seen, it's been about a month now, 3 weeks straight of negative attacks from the left. They are in a tizzy. And America's fallen in love with Sarah Palin. And I know just from my circle, there's a lot of people that were voting Republican, but not talking about it. And boy, have they been talking about it this month. That pick, aside from what Palin brings to the table, it was the first real look of the kind of person that John McCain may appoint, that it's not going to be the old crew and the names of people that were famous in the 90s and part of the Gingrich Revolution. It's a new chapter of republicanism, and it almost gave a view of John McCain as holding the door of the next wave of Republicans, and I'm going to introduce them to you. And it was exciting.
It certainly wasn't that view, but it gave us a view of what John McCain is going to do if he's elected. Yeah, and while there is no doubt that the Republicans have been energized by Sarah Palin, the Democrats are equally as much so, because of the fact that we are looking at that and saying, one heartbeat away from the presidency. No.
But that's my point. They're all negative about her. Obama's totally off his game because they got to beat up
We can't have
Sarah.
a situation where we have someone who has no experience whatsoever being one
Obama?
Heartbeat away from having her finger on that little red button. Anyone who has been through the stuff that she certainly has been vilified in the press, but we don't even know who this woman really is.
Let's ask our members of the press. Do you think she's been vilified in the press? Is that how you would describe
Brian
it?
used an interesting word, I thought. He said that America's fallen in love with Sarah Palin, and I think America is infatuated with Sarah Palin right now. They're not sure whether they're going to be in love with her or not. They don't know anything about her. Right. And it's the same place that Obama was at the beginning of his campaign. We just don't know very much about her. There are lots of stories that are still coming out of Alaska. And, I mean, I know what looks like vilification to some also looks like just sort of exploration to the rest of us. I mean, I think there's a lot about her that we have still yet to learn. And I want to know more.
It's just funny how the people who say, I wish we would talk about issues, when it comes to Sarah Palin, they can't wait to bash her about personal stuff, about family stuff, about she talked to this guy who talked to this guy.
She was asked about issues in the Charlie Gibson interview.
Yeah, she was asked about it. She couldn't answer.
Yes, she could. They just edited out the part that she answered. Of course. And if you read the entire transcript, you see the entire interview, and you see.
What did she say in that? I mean, in all candor, what did she say?
They had a back and
They
had a back and forth about what they were talking about. And there's Charlie Gibson carrying water like he did for Kerry in '04, trying to tie Sarah Palin to George W. Bush, and they went back and forth. She wouldn't take the bait. Back and forth. She wouldn't take the bait. They cut all that stuff out and cut right to the part.
But she also didn't say anything about policy that would change anyone's opinion. She basically said, I can see Russia from my house, so therefore, you know, I have foreign policy experience, and we know I've been to Canada, so I guess that makes me qualified too. She didn't, even when you look at the whole interview and you read all the transcripts, there was nothing in there. There was no substance in there. Now, you can argue about presentation and the fact that cutting out a piece here and a piece there may have affected the presentation, but you can't argue that there was no additional substance in the
So how does this change the game in Virginia, though?
Let's meet halfway, have Sarah Palin on Oprah, and show it live.
I don't have any control over Oprah.
Oprah's not a news show. That's a whole different. That's what I find is so interesting about this campaign is the blurring of news shows. What's a news? I mean, Oprah's fully owned, completely owned entertainment company. You know, it's very interesting how these lines have changed and blurred over time. But what does the addition of these candidates mean here in the Commonwealth, and particularly here in Hampton Roads? What are you seeing on the ground? What's it meant?
Biden's already been here, and that's, I think that's one of the most interesting things of the VP choices is Biden is, I mean, they're branching out and they're doing your typical sort of two-man, two-woman show where you're hitting different spots. Biden comes here by himself, gets front page in the Daily Press, front page in the Virginia Pilot, hardcore campaign. Meanwhile, you know, Palin at this point is sort of strapped to McCain's side. I mean, the Republicans don't want her going out on her own,
or vice versa, as some have alleged.
Well, they don't want her going out on. They don't want her going out on her own and drawing bigger crowds than McCain, which kind of handcuffs them in terms of appearances because they can only be in one place at one time. So I'm interested to see if they're even going to come to Hampton Roads.
And there was a conversation because I think Governor Palin was supposed to come to Hampton Roads at some point. Attorney General McDonnell had indicated that there was a plan. Is that going to happen at some point? Do you suspect? I mean, is that in the works? A visit? Because it had to be rescheduled.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in the works.
Do you expect that?
To quote Obama, that's above my pay grade. But I do think they're going to do a swing through here. It'd probably be both of them, and with this being the largest military installation, they'll be here. There's just in the 2nd District, it's not seen as Thelma Drake needs the help, and the campaign drew over 20,000 people in Fairfax. Who'd have thought that was possible?
County.
Oh yeah, some people had it high as 23,000.
The
Yeah, you're right.
says it was 25,000. The Washington Post says 15,000.
Meanwhile, Biden barely drew 4,000.
But it's the question of attention. I mean, are we going to get the attention from the campaigns? Because there's no doubt about, you know, Barack Obama's been here, Biden's been here. McCain hasn't been here since the primary. And McCain hasn't even been trotting out Senator Warner, which I'm not sure about the senator's health. I don't know what's going on or what's been happening, but he has not been. I mean, he's a strong surrogate who's lionized not only in the Republican Party, but by independents and even some of the blue dog Democrats. So what I haven't seen is surrogates really pounding it hard for McCain and Hampton Roads.
I think this campaign is not. This campaign, to me, is not quite resonating here the way it may be elsewhere in the country. I mean, Virginia is a state that's, in the last couple cycles, has really sort of hewn to the middle and looked at the middle and paid much more attention to the middle. You see that in Warner, you see that in Webb, you see that in Kane. And this is a very polarizing campaign right now. And I'm not entirely sure that message is going to play very well in Hampton Roads. It might. You know, I'm not a pro.
So do you have the sense then that because of the positions, the two major candidates, do you have the sense there's a lot of interest in this race in this community? Do you think people are sort of holding their nose and voting for candidates?
I think there's a lot of interest. I think there's a lot of interest in it, but you know, just from the conversations I have, I detect that a lot of people aren't yet engaging on these candidates seriously because this has been so frivolous. I mean, this has been about lipstick and pigs, and you know, it's not been about the serious substantive issues when the stock market is falling by 800 points.
So you think this week will really change that conversation?
I think it will. I think we'll see a little bit more substance, and I think that's what people are really craving. They're desperate for this to move past the personalities and the 80,000 people at a football stadium and the 25,000 people in Fairfax. I mean, they're really looking to find out what these people plan to do with this nation.
I agree with Don on this. And I think people are sick of seeing Democrats talk to Democrats and Republicans talk to Republicans. The debates start next week, and I think everybody's ready for them. I think they're going to be monstrous ratings for this. No
Who'd
question.
have thought that?
Yeah, I'd be interested.
And it's not a
but
good
they're,
thing.
But they're ready for the guys to say, okay, would you
Yeah.
guys talk to each other for once?
Right.
And neither one of them are that hugely, overwhelming in debates. I mean, neither one of them do particularly well. Obviously, you never know when there's a big time moment one way or the other. But neither one of these guys, you're not dealing with someone who's sort of known as this, this master who can come in and dominate. I mean, Obama had trouble during the Democratic ones, and McCain looks stiff on camera. And I mean, his age against Obama is only going to drive home that he's 72 as well.
Well, you never believe the hype, because Al Gore is supposed to be this fantastic debater, and the polls kind of show he lost a lot of luster when he went up against George W. So there's an expectation game there too. So
when we look at this community, the polling data is all over the place. And I heard James Carville say one night on one of the television programs that he really thought that the Commonwealth in general was going to come down to Hampton Roads, that this is really where it's going to be, because this is the area they have the hardest time getting a handle on, and where they felt like they had the greatest chance. So what do the polls tell you or not tell you about the region?
Well, I think from the outside they're looking at Hampton Roads as if it's monolithic, and it's a series of small communities. Has a huge military presence, but it also has, it's one of the most diverse communities in the nation, and so that makes it very hard to sort of look down here and figure out what we're going to do, because I think, what we're going to do depends on which community you're talking about. And so it's going to be very complicated, and I think nobody's going to get this right.
I've seen polling saying that Senator Obama is up by 13 points in 13% in Hampton Roads. Then I've seen other polls that say McCain is up. What do you look at in the polls?
Issues, of course, of the polls themselves and the polling methods, and whether or not these polls are anywhere near what people are actually thinking or feeling. I think that you have to kind of take polls with a grain of salt. There's really only one poll that matters, that's Election Day. And in between, we have to kind of try to look at trends. Never try to pull a single poll out and say, oh, this is definitive, because it doesn't really demonstrate that this is definite, this is where we are. It is where that group of people who were polled were at that point in time.
Moment, sure.
And so you kind of have to look at polling in a much broader sense, and try to look at the trends and see what you're seeing from the polls to be able to figure out whether or not Hampton Roads is going to go one way or another. I think we would all agree that Hampton Roads is going to be an important component of this, of the state of Virginia, but that right now the race is very close.
Well, and there are X factors. I mean, especially with polling we were talking about beforehand, it doesn't get cell phones. So many people don't have
so many,
landlines,
particularly younger people.
Especially younger people. There was a poll released this week that had a small sample of the African American community, which obviously doesn't do Hampton Roads justice. And I think the other big X factor is, as of earlier this week, you had 250,000 new people registered to vote. Now, granted, during 2004, you had 270,000 new people registered to vote. Nobody knows where that's going to go. I do know who's out really working and registering. I mean, I can't walk into MacArthur Center without someone trying to get me to register from Obama's campaign. And that's what we're seeing down here. But at the same time, look, 2004, 270, it didn't do much for Kerry. But he lost by 9.
Right.
So he didn't.
And then there is
invest.
the news of the requirement for more voter registration forms all over the state. They've made an emergency run because they have so many people interested in voting. I suppose that's a good thing anyway you slice it.
Well, it depends on whether they show up to vote.
Right.
Well,
I mean, at the end of the day, getting people registered is only half the battle. And so that's why as soon as we get past, I guess the deadline is October 6th,
I believe. Yeah.
Once we get past that, then the focus will be on, now we've got these people registered, now we've got to figure out how we're going to get them to the polls, because they don't translate.
Yeah.
They absolutely do not translate.
There are two problems with polls, and everybody needs to always keep in mind to deal with polls frequently. The margin of error. If somebody's up by 4 points and the next day they're up by 5, they didn't gain or lose. Plus or minus 4% on either side. You could be up 3 and down 3, and they're both right. So the margin, you got to factor in a margin of error in some of these polls. And also, if it's registered versus likely voters, a lot of the registered voter models, if it's just registered voters, nobody takes them that seriously.
That's right to that same issue of
the likely voters versus
and even then, when you're trying to get likely voters this year, what's your likely voter model?
Yeah, true enough.
What's the percentage male, female? What's the demographic breakdown of who you think the likely vote? How do you think the likely voter model is going to be? And this year, I've had pollsters tell me we're guessing. We're
Well,
hoping.
beyond that, I mean, there's the matter of whether people are telling pollsters the truth.
Right.
And this is Virginia. We went through the
yes.
the Wilder
Wilder
race,
year, yeah.
and so we don't know. I mean, Wilder was up by 10 points on the eve of the election. 12 points. He barely won.
Right.
And so, no matter what these numbers say on November 3rd, I would expect to be surprised on November 4th.
Well, and we talk about what's going to happen in the next month, these debates where everything goes and bumps and... But in a race this close, it's going to come down, any insider's going to tell you ground game. It's going to come down to weather on the day and ground game. 3 days out.
Ground game, what do you mean by that?
The 72-hour...
The get out the vote
effort,
Right.
Yeah.
where
That's exactly right.
you're driving around, you have houses marked where people need minivan pickups, you have voter rolls, you have these massive cell phone rolls and voter rolls where you can say, have you voted yet? Has your neighbors voted yet? You got to make sure you're getting out to the polls. What time are you getting there? Where are you going? Do you know where your polling station is? I mean, it's all about
Or are people robocalled to death by that point that they don't pick up the phone?
Well, that's the other question.
There is that.
Knock it to death. Who knows?
Yeah. I think, too, the other thing we can't not talk about is the Senate race, because we do have a Senate race at the same time here. All of the focus and attention, of course, on the presidential race. We have some congressional races, and we have some mayoral races that are getting pretty interesting
Well,
here.
we have two. We have, on the south side, we have Suffolk and Virginia Beach.
And these used to be in May.
They used to be in May, and I think between the two cities there are 400 candidates. There are
Only 400?
400. Well, there may be more by the time we're done.
Right.
There are 4 running in Virginia Beach, including the incumbent, and there's 7, including a write-in and an incumbent in Suffolk. And I would, anybody's guess is how both of those races are going to end up.
What do you think has been the impact of moving this to November? Because there are two schools of thought on that you get greater turnout in November because people are coming anyway for the presidential election. But then, you look at a race like this, and as you say, in Suffolk, 7 candidates in the midst of all of this presidential business and all of the Senate and I don't know how you're supposed to figure that out.
I don't either. There's the theory that name recognition wins, and so that would be good for Myra Orbendorf and Lynn Johnson. And then there's the alternate theory, which is that the ground game matters more than anything else, and whoever can knock on the most doors and get the most attention between now and the election will win. That's knocking on doors is a lot easier in Suffolk, which is much smaller than Virginia Beach, but it's going to be very hard in either place to get your message heard over the incredible shouting coming from
There's no question about
Washington.
it.
When running in November, I mean, that's a whole nother swath of the populace that never comes out for these May elections. You have 30,000 people who come out during a typical May election, and depending on the city.
And those 30,000 are pretty intentional about what they're doing because,
And they're just going to be washed under.
Well, let's just remember why May was instituted in the first place. Just the good old boys and never meaning no harm. Keep all of our incumbents very well protected with a low turnout and special interests.
I think we're going to see that after this first cycle of having November elections at the local level, we're going to see some tweaking going on, and we're going to see whether or not it's going to fix. But I'm a firm believer that local elections should be held in November. I think it increases voter turnout. Yes, it makes it much more difficult for the candidates who are running because the candidates now have to do things differently. But when I look at Norfolk's turnout for their May elections and we get 14,000 people out of 110,000 registered voters, then that is the minority dictating for the majority. And it is something that's totally different. If they want to run a race in May where they keep it low profile, they can. You can't, if you want to win in November, you can't keep a low profile.
Interesting. And as we look at the Senate race, I think both of you said you had an opportunity to hear portions of the debate between Mark Warner and Jim Gilmore. What did you think?
Well, I really didn't hear that much of it because I had to run out, but it's basically going to boil down to the same thing. I mean, Mark is not going to mop up the floor as much as with Gilmore. They're both going to take their shots. All the little blurbs that I read about the early things, they came out screaming in the first 2 minutes like a boxing match, and each of them, threw the haymaker. We're not going to see anything major coming up. All of us are going to get a chance though to see them debate. I think October the 3rd is now the statewide debate. It's going to be televised out of Roanoke.
But they've been going at it since the Shad Plank and back in the spring. I mean, they got up on the same stage, and I mean, Warner had a little bit more fun with his speech, and Gilmore has one speed. And I mean, anyone love him or hate him will tell you that he is driven and he is going to go for it. And he got up on the shad plank and he was hitting Mark Warner as fast as he could. So we've seen the debates.
Does anybody think that there's a chance that they will actually look forward at any point in this campaign? Or are they going to look backwards at the car tax and
at each of their gubernatorial runs? Yeah.
Warner keeps talking about the radical centrists, which is just a bad rock band.
Well, actually, a lot of today's debate did center on this is what I did as governor, this is what you did as governor. No, this is what I did as governor, here's what you did. And it was a lot about that. The problem was Gilmore saying, I left you a balanced budget. And he said, yeah, but it was hosed. And I had to raise taxes. It's like, but you promised not to. And Gilmore saying, we can drive the economy with an energy strategy and with offshore drilling, and Mark Warner says, you can't take yes for an answer. I'm in favor of that. And he goes, oh, yeah, you are now. You also were opposed to tax increases, and we saw how that ended up. And
it was commercial.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I was just going to say, that kind of feels like all of them strung together.
That was an hour-long debate today, and that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And it cycled over and over and over again. The funniest question was at the end when they asked them to actually compliment each other, and they actually got very formal. And they talked about some national security issues. And the best thing that Jim Gilmore could say about Mark Warner is he actually continued some of the things that Jim Gilmore started. And that was Jim Gilmore's compliment for Mark Warner.
One speed.
Exactly right.
I'm telling you, one speed.
I want to ask this of our reporter friends here. The thing that I'm observing in this race is that, and I've never seen this in 12 years of doing this radio show, several years of doing programs here on WHRO TV 15. I've never seen the accusation or the concern about media bias, the point at which people will speak to you about their perception of media bias, as I have in this campaign.
Well, just on the news gathering side of things, when Palin was announced, no matter what her background was, you were going to have a ton of reporters on planes to Alaska to find out her background because nobody knew. I mean, when you're getting covered by the Wasilla Daily Telegraph or whatever's out there, you're going to be sending Washington Post, LA Times people. And the idea that this was some attack and that we're trying to tear down Sarah Palin, it's like everyone just wants to know something about her. Now, good and bad context is going to be coming out. But I mean, every single question was either too personal or too brutal or too, you're going into my background. It's like, we're talking about when you were the mayor. This is your executive experience. Let's talk about it.
Kimball, but that may have been the questions, but they weren't the answers that made the front page of the New York Times. Sure, reporters can go to Alaska and study Sarah Palin all day long in the media frenzy and ask the American people if they thought Sarah Palin was negatively beat up in the press. Yes, they were. Did you see Us Magazine? Do we see lies?
About Us Weekly.
That's not that.
You got to understand. You got to understand people.
That tells me
they read.
That superstars are people too and go to the laundromat.
But the bottom line is when reporters go to Alaska, when do they find something that they call news? What do we report? Here's a contradiction. Here's a scandal.
I think we're going to get some very interesting
daughter.
reporting on this ethics investigation. I think that's going to be.
Sure, of course, and we have an obligation, Brian. I know.
If you go there,
wait a minute. Hang on.
If you go there and find
Less
something
than 1
positive,
minute.
what page did it go to?
But I mean, the point is that we have a tendency now in America to listen to only to people we already agree with, and we are less patient with news that is new and that comes without an agenda that's coming from basic reporting. And I think that's what we've seen as much as anything else in this campaign. And I'm not just talking about Sarah Palin. I'm talking about the whole shebang.
Lots of blurred boundaries.
You found good things and bad things. The bad things made page one.
All right. We will be back. Thanks to all of you for being with us today. We will be back in a moment. We'll have a final thought. You might need to hold him down during the final thought. I'm just saying. We'll be back in a moment. A few weeks back, I emceed a retirement dinner, and a dining companion I'd never met before asked me a question in a tone that suggested he had a very clear idea of what my answer should be. Do you think, he asked, that the media is being fair to Sarah Palin? I replied something to the effect that when a relative unknown offers him or herself for a post that, by her running mate's reckoning, consists of breaking ties in the Senate and inquiring into the health of the president, and that's a fairly common description of the vice presidency. It is not only fair, it is actually absolutely incumbent upon journalists to report relevant information that will help voters take the full measure of such a person. For the other three candidates on the big ticket, that information is pretty readily available and has been for some time. So it's critical to know not only what Governor Payne has done, but who she is, how she thinks, and what she would mean for America. And that's why I did a double take last week when Senator McCain's campaign manager said that Governor Payne would answer questions, quote, when we think it's time and when she feels comfortable doing it, unquote. Even more chilling, he said Governor Payne wouldn't answer reporters' questions until, quote, she'll be treated with some level of respect and deference. I would certainly hope that respect is a given. But deference? Deference is for monarchs, and the last king we had in this country was Elvis Aaron Presley. What we need now is not deference. With 45 days left to the election, we need to hear Governor Payne unscripted. We need to hear all the candidates unscripted. Charlie Gibson got the first sit-down interview with Governor Payne, and for the sake of all that is at stake in this historic election, let us hope he did not get the last one. We would like to hear what you're thinking about this election season, and I know I'm going to hear what Brian Kirwin's thinking in about 2 seconds here. You can send us an email at whatmatters@whro.org. Write to us at What Matters, 5200 Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk, Virginia, 23505, or give us a call, 889-9437. You can also check out our website, whatmatters.tv, which is where you can watch past broadcasts of this show and sign up for a weekly email called the What Matters E-Bit. And that'll let you know what you can expect from us each Friday night. Next week, we'll have a look at a local company with 500 employees that is literally saving and changing lives across the country. That's What Matters next week. We'll see you then.